He gave his only coat to a stranger, but had no idea she would turn his entire life upside down. The snow fell steady that night in New York City. Thick, soft flakes drifted down like silent feathers, blanketing the streets in white and muffling the usual noise of honking cars and hurried footsteps. Streetlights flickered, their glow dim through the falling snow, and wind cut through the air like a blade. On a near-empty street corner at the edge of Midtown, under the weak light of a rusted lamppost, a man stood hunched at a lonely bus stop. Ethan Marshall wrapped his worn olive-green jacket tighter around his chest. In his arms, he clutched a manila folder filled with 5 printed resumes. Each one had been handed over with hope and returned with rejection. The folder was all he had left to show for a day spent walking office to office, politely smiling through questions that led nowhere. He was 46 years old, once a respected structural engineer, a widower, a father, and now a man without a home. The cold seeped through the holes in his boots and curled around his ankles like smoke. He shuffled his feet, trying to keep the feeling in his toes, and glanced at the glowing red sign across the street. 8:41 p.m. The bus was late. The folder in his hands crinkled as he shifted his grip. His fingers, dry and reddened from the cold, trembled slightly. He took a slow breath, watching the fog rise from his lips into the freezing night air. There were nights he questioned whether things would ever change, whether this uphill climb was worth it. But still, every morning, he got up and tried again. Then, through the snow, came the distinct sound of heels tapping against pavement. He turned slightly to see a woman walking briskly toward the same bus stop. She looked to be in her early 30s, dressed in a sleek black skirt and a pale blouse. No coat. Her hair was damp, strands stuck to her cheeks, and she hugged her arms tightly around herself as if trying to hold in whatever warmth remained. Ethan instinctively looked away. In this city, you learn to mind your own business. Just another stranger, another cold night, another bus to nowhere. But the wind picked up again, and she flinched, almost like a child. Her teeth were chattering, her lips slightly blue. She stood just a few feet away now, trembling under the awning, rubbing her bare hands together in vain. He risked another glance. There was something about her presence. She was polished, clearly from a different world than his, yet utterly alone in that moment. Ethan felt a flicker of something stir deep in his chest. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was memory. He knew what it was to be cold. He knew what it was to have no one stop, no one look, no one care. He had a choice. Keep the coat, stay warm, or give it away. Without a word, he pulled off his jacket. The cold bit into his skin instantly. His breath caught as the wind sliced through his thin shirt. But he didn't flinch. He stepped toward the woman and held out the jacket. She startled. "You don't have to do that," she said quickly, her voice soft and shaking. Ethan offered a tired, kind smile. "I've already lost enough today," he said. "This coat is the only thing I have left to give." Her eyes searched his, unsure whether to accept such a gesture from a stranger. "But you need it more than I do." "Not tonight," he replied, and gently placed the jacket over her shoulders. The warmth surprised her. She gripped the fabric, instinctively pulling it tighter. It smelled faintly of soap, maybe coffee. Comfort? She didn't mean to, but her shoulders relaxed. Her fingers stopped shaking. She blinked up at him, almost dazed. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded folding his arms across his chest and turning back toward the road. Snowflakes landed on his shirt sleeves and melted against his skin. Silence fell between them, not awkward, but reverent, like the stillness of a chapel. A moment later, she glanced at him again. "What's your name?" "Ethan." "I'm Olivia," she said. "Nice to meet you, Olivia." "You shouldn't have given me your jacket," she added, her voice gentler now. "Probably not," he said, with a faint smile. "But I couldn't just let you freeze." The low rumble of the bus engine broke the quiet. They both looked up as the headlights cut through the snow. Olivia took a step forward toward the curb, then paused. "Do you have somewhere to go?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. "Somewhere," he said vaguely, not adding that it was the back seat of a rusted pickup parked behind a warehouse near the edge of the Bronx. She reached into her purse and handed him a business card. "In case you ever need anything." He took it politely and slipped it into the folder with his resumes, not even glancing at it. People said things like that. Most didn't mean it. Olivia stepped onto the bus, wrapped in the coat. She turned once more before the doors closed, her eyes lingering on him. Ethan raised a hand in farewell. The bus pulled away, and the street grew quiet again. He stood still, shivering, but not entirely from the cold. There was something else now. Something small, something warm, something like hope. He looked up at the sky, watched the snow drift down, then turned and walked slowly into the night. The city lights faded behind Ethan as he made his way through the quiet back streets of the Bronx. Snow crunched under his worn boots, each step deliberate, slow. The streets were mostly empty now. A few shop windows still glowed in the distance, but up here, near the edge of the industrial zone, the world felt hushed, like it was holding its breath. He turned down an alley behind an old warehouse, past piles of discarded pallets and dumpsters nearly buried in snow. In the far corner, under a dim security light, sat his home, an old, rusted 1998 Chevy pickup. The paint had long since faded, the driver's side door groaned every time it opened, and the heater had died 2 winters ago. But it was his. The one place left, that was his. Ethan climbed inside, rubbing his hands together for warmth. The interior was a patchwork of makeshift living. A nest of worn blankets piled on the passenger seat, a small pillow pushed into the corner, a lunchbox tucked beneath the dashboard. He pulled the door shut and leaned back with a sigh. The cold settled around him like an unwelcome guest, but he was used to that. From the glove box, he retrieved a small metal tin. He opened it slowly, carefully, as if the contents were sacred. Inside was a faded photograph. A woman with soft brown eyes and a kind smile stood beside a boy no older than 7, with messy hair and a wide, toothy grin. Grace and Liam. His whole world, once. "Good night, Grace," he whispered. "Good night, kiddo." He leaned back, eyes resting on the roof of the truck, letting the memories come. There was a time when Ethan Marshall built things. Schools, libraries, apartment buildings. He had calloused hands and a sharp mind. He would wake up at 5, kiss his wife goodbye, drop Liam off at elementary school, and head to the job site with a coffee in hand and a plan in his pocket. They weren't wealthy, but they were steady. Safe. Grace had been a kindergarten teacher, always laughing. Always seeing the best in everyone, even when life made it hard to. And Liam had that same laugh, bright and unfiltered. He would chase pigeons in the park, shout answers in class even when he wasn't sure, and tell every stranger they passed that his dad built buildings that scraped the sky. Then came the diagnosis. Stage 4. It was already too late. Ethan quit his job the next day. He stayed home to care for Grace, cooking meals she couldn't eat, holding her hand through the pain, reading books aloud to her even when she could barely keep her eyes open. He never left her side. 9 months later, she was gone, and everything else unraveled like thread from an old sweater. The hospital bills came first. Then the rent. The savings went quickly. He sold the apartment, moved into a smaller one, then smaller still. By the time Liam was 9, they were sleeping in motels. By the time he was 10, the truck became their last shelter. But Ethan tried. Lord, he tried. He turned the back seat into a spaceship. Blankets became asteroid belts. The glove compartment was the control panel. They ate canned soup like it was gourmet, made up stories about the people they saw on the street, played guessing games with constellations through the windshield. Every morning, no matter how hard the night had been, Ethan woke up early, shaved, tucked in his shirt, and walked Liam to school. Not because he had to, but because he wanted Liam to believe the world could still be normal. Still be kind. One night at the shelter, a volunteer asked him, "Why do you still cut your hair so neatly?" Ethan smiled. "Because my son needs to believe things can get better. And I need to look like I believe that too." He took whatever jobs he could find, fixing gutters, moving furniture, hauling bricks on short-term construction gigs. He showed up every day, strong back, quiet work ethic, always early, always grateful, but it was never enough. Then last fall, the social worker came. She said Liam needed stability, a real home. That living in a truck, even with love, wasn't safe. Ethan didn't argue. He knew she was right. But that didn't make it easier. He signed the papers through tears, hugged his son tighter than he ever had, and whispered, "Just for now, buddy. I'll come back for you. I promise." Since that day, Ethan had done everything he could to rebuild. He attended free workshops at the library, took notes during community job fairs, memorized building codes late at night under the dome light of his truck. He printed resumes at a charity center and handed them out with quiet hope. Every "we'll let you know" felt like a door closing. Tonight, handing over his jacket to a stranger hadn't been planned, but as he sat in the cold silence of the truck, he didn't regret it. If anything, it had reminded him that he was still someone. Someone who could give. Someone who could choose kindness, even when he had little else to offer. He thought of the woman again, Olivia. There had been something in her eyes, a mixture of surprise, confusion, and maybe recognition. She had thanked him softly, sincerely. That small moment had stayed with him all evening, like an ember, glowing faintly in a dark room. He reached for the folder beside him, the one with his resumes, and opened it. Inside, among the papers, was the business card she had given him. He read the name slowly. Olivia Dawson, CEO, Dawson Innovations. His eyebrows lifted slightly. He set the card down beside the photo of Liam and Grace. 3 pieces of his life. Past. Present. Hope. Then, wrapping a threadbare blanket around his shoulders, Ethan leaned back and closed his eyes. The truck was cold, the future uncertain, but something inside him felt lighter. Maybe, just maybe, something was about to change. The elevator doors slid open with a quiet chime, and Olivia Dawson stepped into the silent embrace of her penthouse apartment. The warmth inside wrapped around her like a soft blanket, but it did little to thaw the weight in her chest. Her heels tapped across the marble floor, echoing softly through a space that felt more like a museum than a home. Sleek furniture, clean lines, perfect lighting, and yet not a single family photo, no hand-drawn cards taped to the fridge. Just the hum of appliances and the distant wind brushing against thick glass. She dropped her purse onto the entry table with a sigh and reached to slip off the jacket, the one given to her by a stranger at a bus stop barely an hour ago. It still smelled like something familiar. Soap? Coffee? Or maybe it was just memory pretending to be scent. As she folded the jacket, her fingers brushed against something in the inner pocket. Curious, she reached in and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was worn soft at the corners, the edges smudged from being handled too many times. A slight crease ran through the middle like a scar. She hesitated, then opened it carefully. Her breath caught. It was a child's drawing, done in crayon, shaky and colorful. Two stick figures stood beneath a crooked sun. One had big shoes and a smile. The other had pigtails and held a balloon. Between them floated a red heart. Scrawled at the bottom, in uneven, determined handwriting, were the words, "I love you, Daddy." Liam. The words blurred before her eyes. She sat down slowly on the edge of her couch, the drawing in one hand, the jacket still draped across her lap. For a long moment, she just stared. Not thinking, not blinking, just feeling. Liam. That name stuck in her mind like a soft thorn. She thought of the man at the bus stop. Ethan. His eyes, tired, kind, but holding something heavier than just the cold. The way he held that folder close to his chest like it carried more than just paper. Like it held the last threads of his hope. And now, here in her hand, was the proof. A crayon drawing full of love and longing. A father's most valuable possession, carried in the pocket of a jacket he gave away without a second thought. This wasn't just about kindness. This was about sacrifice. Olivia looked around her immaculate apartment, floor-to-ceiling windows, designer furniture. A fridge full of untouched meals from catered deliveries. It was everything she had worked for, everything she had earned. But for the first time in years, it felt hollow. She unfolded the drawing fully and traced the heart with her fingertip, a shaky, child's heart. Pure and sincere. Her throat tightened. She hadn't cried in a long time. Not real crying, not since she was a little girl herself, cold and hungry, sitting on the steps of a church in a neighborhood far less forgiving than this one. Back then, her name had meant nothing. Her future was a question no one cared to answer, until he came. An older man with a weathered face and kind eyes had approached her, knelt beside her, and placed his coat over her shoulders. He hadn't asked questions, he hadn't given advice, he had just sat with her. That moment, quiet, unremarkable to the world, had changed everything. She never saw him again. She didn't even know his name. But she remembered how she felt, seen, safe, human. And now, tonight, decades later, another coat had wrapped around her shoulders. Different man. Same silence, same warmth. Her fingers curled around the jacket. The tears came softly at first, then heavier. Not from pain, but from something deeper. something long, buried beneath years of ambition and boardroom battles. She had fought so hard to escape the life she came from, she had forgotten what had saved her in the first place. Not a promotion, not a deal, but kindness. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand and pulled the jacket closer, hugging it to her chest as if it might hold the memory in place. The drawing slipped slightly from her fingers. She caught it and laid it gently across her lap. She studied it again. Daddy. A man with nothing had still carried that word like a shield. She wondered what had become of Liam. Was he safe? Did he know how much he was loved? Did he still believe in his father the way he once did with crayons and crooked sons? Olivia didn't know, but she knew this much. She couldn't forget what had happened that night. Couldn't pretend it was just another passing moment in a city of strangers. She reached for her phone and set it beside the drawing. Her thumb hovered over the screen, hesitating. Not yet. Not tonight. Instead, she whispered to the empty room, "I see you, Ethan." And for the first time in a long, long while, she felt like that little girl again, and she wasn't cold anymore. Morning came slowly, slipping through the tall windows of Olivia Dawson's office like a whisper. The skyline beyond was a mixture of silver and gold, the sun brushing over glass towers that glistened with quiet power. The world looked polished from the 42nd floor, but Olivia wasn't looking out. She was staring at a child's crayon drawing. It lay on her desk beside a steaming cup of coffee she hadn't touched. She had unfolded and refolded it a dozen times, as if memorizing each shaky line could somehow explain the weight it placed on her chest. "Daddy, me, I love you." 3 simple phrases. But they refused to let her go. She ran her fingers over the page, remembering Ethan's eyes, the way he smiled, tired but kind. The way he gave without hesitation, even though he clearly had nothing left. That coat, his only one, was now hanging neatly on a rack in her office. She had cleaned it, but something in its threadbare fabric still held his presence. A quiet knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Melissa Carter, her assistant of nearly 6 years, stepped inside with a folder tucked under her arm. "Yes, Melissa?" "You asked not to be disturbed unless it was urgent." Olivia nodded. "Come in." Melissa sat, sensing the unusual stillness in the room. "Everything all right?" Olivia took a breath, then said clearly, "I need your help finding someone." Melissa blinked. "Of course." "Who?" Olivia hesitated. "His name is Ethan. I don't have a last name." "I met him last night at the 56th and Madison bus stop around 8:30. He gave me his coat." Melissa's eyebrows rose. "You want to find a man from a bus stop?" "Yes." Olivia didn't flinch. "And this stays between us?" Melissa nodded without another word. That afternoon, while meetings buzzed and boardrooms filled with talk of strategy and projections, Melissa quietly put her skills to work. Olivia's team, experts at locating elusive developers, potential partners, even poachable executives, now turned their attention to something much more delicate. They started with the obvious: traffic camera footage. From nearby intersections, they found blurry clips of Ethan's figure. Nothing clear, but enough to trace his movement as he boarded a bus minutes after Olivia did. Cross-referencing bus routes with security entry logs from nearby shelters gave them a few potential riders. Most didn't match. They searched job forums. One name kept appearing in posts asking for construction work: Ethan Marshall. No resume, no headshot, just a few polite inquiries and a prepaid number. No social media, no current address. Finally, Melissa walked into Olivia's office, holding a thin folder. "We found him," she said quietly. Olivia stood, heart suddenly louder in her ears. The file was sparse. A copy of an old driver's license, a faded LinkedIn profile that hadn't been updated in nearly a decade, a construction license that had long since expired. One photo taken years ago, a younger Ethan, with shorter hair, standing proudly beside a newly completed building. There were no arrest records, no debts, no scandal, just absence. "What about now?" Olivia asked. Melissa pointed to a report at the back. "One of our staff tracked him to an old warehouse in the Bronx. He's been seen sleeping in a pickup truck behind the building. Same one he boarded from last night's route." Olivia looked at the photo, at the folder, then at her coat, hanging silently near the door. "I want to go there." Melissa looked surprised. "You could send someone, we could bring him here." "No," Olivia said softly. "This isn't a business meeting." An hour later, Olivia sat in the back of a black sedan as it wove through parts of the Bronx she hadn't visited in years. The streets looked different here. Older. Tired. A few shops remained open, but most windows were barred. Graffiti colored the bricks like bruises. People walked with collars up, heads down. The driver turned onto a side street lined with warehouses. Snow, still untouched in some places, piled along the curb. "There," the driver said, nodding toward a corner. She saw it immediately. The truck, old, rusted, tires half covered in snow, parked alone in the shadow of the warehouse. She stepped out, the cold stinging her cheeks. Each footstep on the gravel felt loud. Her breath misted in front of her as she approached slowly, her heart pounding. As she neared, the door of the truck creaked open. Ethan emerged, blinking in the daylight. He wore the same clothes from the night before. His face registered confusion, then recognition, then something like embarrassment. "Olivia?" he said, voice rough with sleep. She offered a small, uncertain smile. "Hi, Ethan." He looked down at himself, then back at her. "What are you doing here?" "I came to find you." He crossed his arms, cautious. "Why?" She hesitated. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about what you did." He gave a tired laugh. "You didn't need to come all the way here to thank me." A card would have worked. "It's not about thanks," she said gently. "It's about not letting something good disappear without being seen." They stood in silence, snow still falling lightly around them. Two people from different worlds. A coat between them, and something else, something unspoken but real. "You came all this way just for that?" Ethan asked, eyes narrowing. Olivia nodded. "Yes, and maybe something more." The next time Olivia saw Ethan, he was bent over a stack of cinder blocks at a construction site in Queens. She had waited in her car for nearly 20 minutes, watching from a distance as he moved slowly and deliberately. No conversation, no distractions. Just honest labor beneath a dull winter sky. He wore a faded flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, despite the biting wind. His breath puffed visibly with every exhale. His hands were raw, his nails dark with dust and cement. And yet, there was precision in the way he worked, like a man who still believed in doing things right, even when no one was watching. When he finally took a break, Ethan sat on a low concrete wall, sipping from a plastic water bottle. That's when Olivia stepped out of her car and walked toward him. He looked up and froze. She smiled gently, holding 2 paper cups. Thought you might like something warm. Ethan stood quickly, brushing at the dirt on his jeans. You again. I figured you wouldn't be thrilled, she said, with a small laugh. I wouldn't say that, he replied, cautiously taking the coffee. But this is unexpected. They stood quietly for a moment. The wind rustled the scaffolding nearby, and somewhere in the distance a jackhammer echoed off the buildings. Olivia broke the silence first. Would you come with me? Just for a bit. I want to show you something. Ethan hesitated, glancing back toward the foreman. I already spoke to him, she said. Told him you had an interview. He raised an eyebrow. I don't have an interview. You do now. That got a surprised chuckle from him. All right, let's see what this is about. The ride to downtown Manhattan was quiet. Ethan sat beside her, still dusty from work, shifting in his seat. He seemed uncomfortable, not by her presence, but by the car, the polished dashboard, the weight of the unknown. When they pulled up in front of Dawson Innovations, he stared out the window for a long moment. I don't belong here, he muttered. Olivia turned to him. Just come upstairs. Inside the towering building, the lobby was all marble and chrome. Clean lines, suits, polished shoes. Olivia led him past the front desk and into a private elevator. They entered a small conference room on the 12th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a breathtaking view of the city. But Ethan didn't look outside. His eyes stayed on the table in front of him, where Olivia had placed a manila folder. He cleared his throat. So, what is this? Not a thank you, Olivia said, sitting across from him. I already did that. He nodded slowly, unsure. I didn't just come looking for you because of what you gave me that night, she said. I came because you reminded me of something I had forgotten. Ethan looked down. I built this company from scratch, she continued. Apps. Strategy. Meetings. I made it all the way to the top. And somewhere along the way, I left pieces of myself behind. That night at the bus stop, you didn't just offer a coat. You reminded me that leadership, real leadership, starts with kindness. He blinked. I'm not a leader, Olivia. Yes, you are. He let out a breath, shaking his head. Look at me, I sleep in a truck. I haven't worn a suit in years. I'm not qualified to walk into places like this, let alone work here. You don't need a suit, she said, and this isn't about qualifications on paper. She slid the folder toward him. He opened it slowly. Inside was a proposal, a job description, a contract, and a starting salary. He read the title aloud. Human Values and Culture Advisor? Olivia nodded. It's a new role, one I created after meeting you, someone who sits in on department meetings, onboarding sessions, product development discussions, not to talk about numbers or deadlines, but people, empathy, humanity. The things we tend to forget. Ethan looked stunned. Why me? Because you live it, she said. You know what it feels like to be overlooked. To hurt. To still choose to give, even when you have nothing. He stared at the folder for a long time. This isn't charity, Ethan, she added. It's something only you can offer. Not degrees, not data. Heart. He set the folder down gently. I'm not sure I can do this. You can, she said, voice steady. Because you already have. He was quiet for several seconds. Then he asked, almost shyly, what if I mess it up? Olivia leaned forward. Then we fix it. Together. He looked up at her. And in that moment, something shifted. A wall cracked. A corner of his guarded expression softened. "Grace used to say I made people feel safe," he said quietly. "I guess maybe I could do that again." "You already did," Olivia replied. He didn't respond with words. Instead, he slowly closed the folder, placed both hands on it, and nodded, not just to her offer, but to something deeper. A second chance. A beginning. The drive away from downtown was quiet, though not in an uncomfortable way. Ethan sat in the passenger seat beside Olivia, watching the city skyline slowly disappear behind them. He hadn't asked where they were going. There was a peace in the silence, a kind of trust that didn't need to be spoken. They passed through neighborhoods with tree-lined streets and weathered buildings. The air was thick with the scent of winter and memory. Olivia glanced at him from time to time, but Ethan kept his eyes on the passing scenery, as if trying to remember each streetlight and corner. Finally, she pulled the car up to a modest red brick building with a faded green awning. The paint was chipped in places, but the windows were warm with light. A hand-painted sign above the entrance read, "Thomas's Place, a safe space for every child." Ethan's brow furrowed as he read it. "Thomas's Place?" Olivia shut off the engine. "Come inside. There's something I want you to see." They stepped out into the cold. The front door opened with a soft creak, and immediately the air changed. Inside, the building was filled with color and warmth. The walls were painted with handprints, cartoon animals, and murals made by small hands. Paper snowflakes hung from the ceiling. Laughter echoed down the hall. It didn't feel like a charity. It felt like home. As they walked through the hallway, a small girl darted past them holding a book almost as big as her head. A volunteer followed, calling after her with a laugh. Down another hallway, a group of kids sat on beanbags, reading aloud in different voices. The smell of crayons and freshly baked bread lingered in the air. Ethan slowed his steps. "What is this place?" "This," Olivia said softly, "is where everything changed for me." She led him past a community kitchen, where an older woman was stirring soup on the stove, and into a wide room filled with mismatched chairs, bookshelves, and handmade posters. In one corner, two boys were building a puzzle. A teenage volunteer tied a shoelace for a child who looked no older than 5. Ethan turned to her, confused but intrigued. Olivia took a slow breath. "When I was 12, I ran away from my last foster home. It was cold. I didn't have a coat. I remember curling up outside a church, just waiting for morning." Ethan's eyes softened. He didn't interrupt. "That night, someone found me, a man. I never knew his name, just that he had grey in his beard and eyes that didn't look through me. He sat down, took off his coat, and wrapped it around my shoulders. Didn't say much, just stayed with me." Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. "He didn't leave?" "No," Olivia said, her throat tightening. "He stayed the whole night, just so I wouldn't feel invisible." She looked around the room. "Years later, when I had the means, I came back here and built this. I named it after him, Raymond Green. That was his name. I found out later through the church records. But to me, he was just kindness with a human face." Ethan turned toward the children playing across the room. "So this place, it's for kids like you were." "Yes, kids who need to be seen. Heard, held for a while in something warm." Ethan said nothing for a moment. Then quietly, "I never thought someone like you came from something like that." She met his gaze. Neither did a lot of people. But that night, one coat changed my path. And last week, another man gave me his. Ethan's eyes dropped to the floor. "Ethan," she said, stepping closer, "you didn't just remind me of Raymond. You reminded me of who I used to be, of why I built this place, why I believe in second chances." A long pause passed between them. The sounds of children laughing and pages flipping filled the room like soft music. He swallowed hard. "It doesn't feel like I've done anything big." "But you did," she said. "You gave away something you needed. That's never small." He looked toward a mural on the wall, children's handprints arranged in the shape of a heart, each one signed with a name. In the center were the words, "You matter." His voice cracked when he spoke again. I forgot what that felt like. Olivia reached for his arm, resting her hand gently. "Then let this place remind you." And in that quiet, cluttered, beautiful room, something shifted inside Ethan Marshall. It wasn't loud or sudden. It was soft, subtle. Like the moment a long-shut window creaks open and lets in light again. He blinked back tears and nodded. Not for Olivia. Not for the building, but for himself. For the boy inside who had once built cities with blocks. For the man who still carried his son's drawing like a prayer. For the stranger who for the first time in years felt seen. Ethan Marshall's first day at Dawson Innovations came quietly. There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no photos splashed across the company intranet, just a small meeting room on the 5th floor, a whiteboard with old notes scribbled in blue ink, and a few department heads seated around a long table, curious but guarded. Olivia introduced him simply. "This is Ethan Marshall," she said. "He's joining us as an advisor for culture and human values." There were polite nods, forced smiles. Some of the executives whispered quietly when they thought she wasn't looking. One glanced at Ethan's worn shoes. Another tapped their tablet as if already running late. But Ethan didn't flinch. He stood straight, hands folded calmly in front of him, and said, "I don't come with numbers or slides. I come with a story, one that might sound like someone you passed on your way to work this morning." And then he began. Not with a dramatic retelling or carefully packaged life lesson, he spoke like someone who had lived on the other side of polished floors and glass doors, someone who had known what it was to lose everything and still choose to get up and try again. He told them about Grace, about Liam, about how he shaved every morning before walking his son to school, even when they were living in the truck, because a father needs to believe things can get better if he wants his child to believe it too. He didn't cry. He didn't beg for sympathy. He simply offered honesty. And in that room of professionals with degrees and titles, there was silence. Not the kind that comes from awkwardness, the kind that comes from remembering something real. In the days that followed, Ethan didn't take over meetings. He didn't stand in front of auditoriums. He simply walked the halls, sat quietly in break rooms, and listened. At first, people passed him by. But then someone stopped. A junior developer, no older than 25, with tired eyes and a cracked phone screen. She asked if it was okay to sit with him during lunch. He nodded. She never spoke, but she came again the next day. Then came a maintenance worker who had been with the company for 12 years but never once invited to a staff luncheon. Ethan asked him about his kids. They talked for 40 minutes about Little League and peanut butter sandwiches. Slowly, something began to shift It wasn't loud. It wasn't corporate. It was human. One morning, a young intern pulled Ethan aside near the elevator. "I heard what you said last week about being tired, not broken," she said. That hit me. I thought I was weak because I was overwhelmed, but I'm not. I just care too much. Ethan smiled gently. Caring too much isn't a flaw. It's a compass. By the end of the week, those words were printed on sticky notes across cubicles. You're not broken. You're tired. Caring too much just means you haven't stopped believing. By the end of the first month, Dawson Innovations looked the same, but it felt different. People lingered in the halls a little longer. Lunch breaks became full of actual conversations. The quiet hum of exhaustion gave way to the low buzz of purpose. Olivia noticed it from her corner office. She saw department heads who once led with pressure begin to lead with presence. More importantly, she saw employees walking into Ethan's small office, a modest room tucked near the back of the floor, filled with second-hand books, plants he'd brought from home, and a coffee pot that never stopped brewing. Some came to talk, others just sat. Ethan didn't offer solutions. He offered space, a space where vulnerability wasn't weakness and silence wasn't failure. One Thursday afternoon, Ethan found a folded napkin left on his desk. No name, no handwriting, just a simple drawing of two stick figures holding hands under a crooked sun. He stared at it for a long time, heart aching in the quietest way. Liam. He wondered if his son would be proud of the man he was becoming again. Outside of work, his life had begun to change too. With Olivia's help and a small housing stipend from the company, Ethan had moved into a modest one-bedroom house on the edge of Brooklyn. It had a creaky porch, a little patch of soil out front, and windows that let in light in the early morning. Most importantly, it had space for Liam. His son was now studying at a local university, majoring in environmental science. They had dinner together twice a week. Spaghetti and meatballs, mac and cheese from a box. It didn't matter. It was family again. One night, as Liam helped unpack a box of Ethan's old things, he found the coat, the one Ethan had given Olivia, at the bus stop. "Is this the one?" Liam asked. Ethan nodded. "You kept it?" "She gave it back," Ethan said softly, "in her own way." In quiet corners of the company, people still talked about that first meeting. About how Ethan didn't bring PowerPoint slides or market research. He brought something else, a reminder. That we all carry something invisible. That sometimes the greatest kind of leadership doesn't shout from stages. It listens in silence. The first time Ethan turned the key in the front door of his new home, his hand trembled slightly. The house wasn't big, just a small, weathered one-story in the quiet part of Brooklyn, with siding that needed painting and a porch that creaked if you stepped too close to the edge. But it had something Ethan hadn't felt in years: permanence. For so long, he'd slept in parking lots, under overpasses, behind warehouses, places people pass by without noticing. Now, he stood in a doorway that belonged to him. The company had helped with the down payment. Olivia had handled the paperwork. But this moment, this step onto creaky wooden floors and into rooms that smelled like fresh paint and possibility, this belonged to Ethan. He closed the door behind him and leaned against it for a moment, breathing it in. It smelled like home. The kitchen was small, with old tile counters and a single window over the sink. Sunlight poured through, warming the faded linoleum. The cabinets still squeaked, and the fridge hummed louder than it should, but Ethan didn't care. He unpacked slowly, one box at a time. Books, a second-hand lamp. A framed picture of Grace smiling on their wedding day. He placed it on the mantel and stared at it for a while. "You'd like this place," he whispered. In the bedroom, he hung Liam's old baseball cap on the doorknob. It was waiting. That Saturday, Liam arrived. The last time they had stood this close in a real home, Ethan had been signing custody papers through tears. Now, his son was taller, voice deeper, carrying a duffel bag and a shy, hesitant smile. "Dad," he said, glancing around the front yard. "Is this really yours?" Ethan nodded. "Ours, if you want it to be." Liam stepped forward and hugged him. Not a stiff, awkward hug, a real one. Strong. Familiar. Inside, they explored room by room. Liam pointed out which corner he wanted for a desk. Asked if they could paint his bedroom navy blue. Laughed when they found a loose floorboard that groaned like a haunted house. It felt natural. As if the time apart had not erased what they'd shared, only paused it. That night, they cooked together. Spaghetti and garlic bread. Simple, but it might as well have been a holiday feast. Ethan stirred the sauce while Liam grated cheese, the two of them side by side in a kitchen barely big enough for one. As they sat at the small table near the window, Ethan lit a candle he'd found in a donation box. Not for romance, for reverence. "To new beginnings," he said, lifting his glass of tap water. Liam clinked his cup of root beer against it. "To keeping promises." They both smiled. After dinner, Liam helped wash dishes while Ethan dried. The radio played a soft jazz station in the background. Through the window, they could see the porch light flickering gently. "Did you ever think we'd get here?" Liam asked quietly. Ethan paused, a wet plate in his hands. "I hoped, but I didn't know how." "You kept going, though." "I had to," Ethan replied. "You were out there somewhere. I couldn't stop until I found my way back to you." Liam looked at him. "You did." Later that night, they sat on the porch with mismatched chairs and mugs of cocoa. The sky was clear, stars scattered across the dark like tiny promises. Liam leaned back and said, "You know, I used to dream about this." "This house?" "No. Just you being okay, having a place to sleep. I used to pretend your truck was actually a spaceship, remember?" Ethan chuckled. "You even named it." "Yeah, the Starbird," Liam grinned. "I told the other kids it could fly." "You made it easier," Ethan said softly. "I thought I was protecting you. But truth is, you were protecting me too." Liam didn't reply, but he reached over and squeezed his father's hand. It said enough. In the weeks that followed, their rhythm became beautifully ordinary. Liam went to classes during the day, sometimes riding his bike, sometimes walking. Ethan woke early, packed lunch for him like he used to, even adding a note once in a while. "You've got this. Proud of you. Remember who you are." He filled the fridge, folded laundry, planted a tomato vine out back. Small things. But every little act felt like laying a new brick in the foundation of the life he was rebuilding. In the evenings, they cooked together, played cards, or sat in silence with the TV on low. Sometimes, Olivia would stop by, always with something thoughtful, like a book Liam might like or a pie from her favorite bakery. One evening, as they were cleaning up, Liam paused and turned to Ethan. "I like it here," he said. "I mean, I feel safe." Ethan swallowed hard. "That's all I ever wanted." One morning, Ethan sat on the porch sipping his coffee, watching the sun stretch across the neighborhood. Birds chirped. A neighbor waved. It wasn't perfect. The fence still needed fixing. The porch roof sagged slightly. But it was theirs. He looked at the driveway. Olivia had parked there the night before. Her shoes were still by the front door. He smiled. What began as a moment of compassion had grown into something he never expected: community, stability, even love. But most of all, it had brought him back to being a father, and that was everything. There was no defining moment. No dramatic kiss in the rain, no candlelit confession under fireworks. Instead, Ethan and Olivia's love arrived the way spring creeps into a long winter. Quietly, gently, without announcement. It began in the simplest ways. Lunches shared in the company cafeteria, away from the polished boardroom tables and digital screens. At first, they talked about work, about the employees Ethan had helped, about the mentorship program Olivia was expanding. But over time, their conversations drifted to favorite childhood books, holiday traditions, the way both of them still ordered hot chocolate when they were feeling overwhelmed. One Friday afternoon, Olivia knocked on the door of Ethan's office holding 2 paper cups. "They were out of coffee," she said. "But I thought you wouldn't mind cocoa." He smiled. "Never do." They sat side by side in silence, the kind where nothing needed to be said because everything already was. On Sundays, Olivia started showing up at Ethan's little house in Brooklyn. She always brought something: a pie, a book, sometimes just herself. Liam would open the door with a grin, already knowing it was her. She would help fold laundry while chatting with him about college classes. He'd tease her for folding socks the wrong way, and she'd call him a hopeless case. Sometimes, after Liam had gone to bed, Ethan and Olivia would sit on the back steps with mugs of tea. They talked about everything and nothing. About Grace, about Raymond Green, about how, even with all her success, Olivia still sometimes felt like that 12-year-old girl outside the church. Ethan listened, not with pity, with presence. And that meant more to her than flowers or diamonds ever could. One Saturday morning, Olivia showed up with a bag of gardening tools. "I thought we'd plant something," she said. Ethan blinked. "I haven't gardened since Liam was a toddler." "Well," she replied, holding up a packet of wildflower seeds, "we're about to find out if it's like riding a bike." They spent the morning digging up the patch of soil beside the porch, laughing over worms and arguing about spacing. By the end, their hands were filthy and their faces flushed from the sun. But the ground was filled with promise. And Olivia, watching Ethan wipe sweat from his brow, thought to herself, "This is what steady love looks like." As the weeks passed, Dawson Innovations continued to thrive. But so did something else, something slower, quieter, but just as powerful. Olivia found herself smiling more, sleeping better, laughing at things she once brushed off. Ethan, too, seemed lighter. He still woke early, still packed Liam's lunches, still sat with employees who needed a space to breathe. But now, there was a calmness in him, a man no longer carrying the world alone. They didn't talk about what they were. They didn't need labels. They just showed up for each other, again and again. And again. One evening, after a particularly long day, Olivia stopped by with takeout, They sat in the living room, surrounded by the scent of garlic and the sound of an old jazz record Ethan had found at a yard sale. Liam had gone to a study group. The house was quiet. "You know," Olivia said, pulling her feet up onto the couch, "I used to think love had to be loud. Like in movies." Ethan looked over. "Big declarations? Grand gestures?" "Exactly," she nodded. "But this feels like exhaling after holding my breath for years." Ethan was silent for a moment. Then he reached over, gently taking her hand. "You don't need noise," he said. "You just need someone who stays." She squeezed his hand in return, and that was enough. They began spending weekends together more intentionally. Trips to the farmer's market, movie nights with burnt popcorn, drives out of the city with no destination in mind. They didn't rush, didn't try to impress each other, they just lived. And somewhere in the simple rhythm of those days, between cooking together and folding towels and watching Liam fall asleep during documentaries, they fell fully, gently, and irrevocably in love. One night, while standing on the rooftop of Dawson Innovations, Olivia looked out at the city skyline glowing beneath a navy sky. Ethan stood beside her, hands in his coat pockets. "You've changed this place," she said softly. He chuckled. "No, I just reminded them of what they already knew." She turned to him. "You reminded me too." He looked at her for a long moment. The wind played gently with her hair. The city lights reflected in her eyes, and though no words passed between them, Ethan knew. He knew this wasn't just kindness anymore. This was love, rooted in quiet sacrifice, grown in trust. Bloomed in the small, everyday spaces where truth has room to breathe. They never made a grand announcement, but people noticed. The way Olivia's smile lingered a little longer after meetings. The way Ethan kept a photo of the three of them, him, Olivia, and Liam, on his desk, just beside a small pot of wildflowers. One act of kindness had rewritten their stories. And now, side by side, they were writing something new. Together. The atrium of Dawson Innovations had never looked like this before. Gone were the digital banners of quarterly sales milestones and investor accolades. In their place were soft, white drapes cascading from the high ceilings, strings of warm fairy lights looping around the support beams, and a single spotlight shining on a glass easel at the center of the room. On the easel hung a jacket, frayed at the cuffs, slightly faded, still carrying the weight of a New York winter. And beneath it, engraved in bronze, the words, "One small act of kindness can rewrite a life." Employees stood shoulder to shoulder, dressed not in suits, but in their Sunday best. Developers, assistants, janitors, executives, interns, all gathered not to launch a product, but to celebrate a principle. Kindness. Olivia stepped up to the podium, her voice steady and warm. "A year ago," she began, "I stood at a bus stop, freezing, tired, and more lost than I realized. And then someone I had never met did something no one else had that night." She paused, glancing toward the crowd. "He gave me his coat." A soft murmur of recognition moved through the room. Many of them knew the story now. Most had heard the details through hallway whispers, cafeteria chats, or Ethan's quiet conversations over coffee. "But it wasn't just the coat," Olivia continued. "It was the way he gave it. No expectation, no hesitation. Just kindness." She turned to the easel, gently lifting the corner of the jacket with her fingertips. "It reminded me of the man who once gave me warmth when I was a child. It reminded me of why I built this company." Why I believe that what we create inside these walls matters just as much as what we build outside them. She turned back to the audience. And today, we honor that moment. And more importantly, the man behind it. She looked toward the side of the stage. Ethan, will you come up here? Ethan Marshall stood slowly. He wore a simple suit, borrowed, pressed with care, his hair neatly combed. His shoes shined the best he could, but what truly set him apart was the expression on his face. Peace. He walked to the stage to the sound of applause that wasn't loud, but heartfelt, the kind that reaches all the way down to your chest and stays there. Olivia met him halfway, her eyes glistening with emotion. "This," she said softly, handing him a small envelope, "belongs to you." Inside was a deed, official, signed. Sealed, the house, the porch, the garden with the wildflowers, all of it now truly his. Gasps echoed from the crowd. Ethan blinked in stunned silence, but before he could speak, he raised a hand, calmly, asking for a moment. "I actually have something too," he said. From his jacket pocket, he pulled out a small box, worn, faded at the corners. It had clearly been carried for some time. He turned to Olivia. "You said this coat changed your life," he began, his voice trembling, "but you changed mine. You gave me back my name. My son, a roof, and hope." He opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring, not flashy, but polished. Honest. "I kept it in the pocket," he said, "because if there's anything more valuable than this coat, it's you." The room went silent. "Olivia Dawson," he said, his voice raw, "will you marry me?" For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Olivia let out a soft, laughing sob as she nodded. "Yes," she said through tears. "Yes, of course." The crowd erupted. Not in noise, but in feeling. People clapped, cheered. Some wiped away tears. Others just stood, hearts full, faces soft with wonder. A month later, the wedding took place. Not in a ballroom, not in a five-star resort, but at Thomas's place, the little red brick community center that had saved them both in different ways. Children decorated the chairs with paper flowers. The cake was homemade by one of Ethan's mentees. Nothing matched. No one cared. Olivia wore a simple white dress, her hair loose. Ethan wore that same borrowed suit, cleaned and pressed once more. Liam stood beside him as best man, beaming. The guests were people who had been touched by their story. Volunteers, co-workers, children from the center, neighbors, and dozens of young employees who had once sat in Ethan's quiet office looking for hope. During the vows, Olivia held Ethan's hands and looked into his eyes. "Once you gave me a coat," she said, voice steady. "Tonight, I give you my whole life." Her words fell over the room like sunlight through stained glass. Warm, radiant, unforgettable. Ethan didn't speak. He just nodded, eyes full of tears, and the crowd cried with him. The reception spilled into the courtyard. Kids ran barefoot under strings of lights. Volunteers danced with interns. Someone played music from a phone speaker, and no one minded the crackling. At the edge of the courtyard stood an easel. On it again the jacket, old, faded, now framed forever, and beside it a photo of Ethan and Olivia side by side under the sign of Thomas's place, her head resting on his shoulder. His arm wrapped around her, a soft, eternal moment captured in time. That image, would go on to be shared around the world. Not because of who they were, but because of what they proved. That kindness is not weakness. That giving, especially when you have little, is the most powerful kind of love. That healing is possible. And that sometimes the smallest gesture, a coat, a smile, a seat beside someone, can echo through lives in ways we may never fully understand. Ethan didn't set out to change the world, he just refused to let the world take his goodness. And in return, the world gave him everything he thought he had lost. A home, a family. A love story written not in grandeur, but in grace. In a world that often feels too fast and too disconnected, the story of Ethan Marshall and Olivia Dawson reminds us of something deeply American and timeless. That kindness, especially when it's quiet and unexpected, still matters. A simple act like offering a worn coat on a cold night became the turning point in two lives. It didn't take wealth, status, or speeches. It took compassion. For older adults who've lived through decades of change, this story hits close to home. It reminds us that we're never too old to make a difference, and we're certainly never too far gone to begin again. Ethan didn't have much, but he had heart, and that was enough to rebuild everything he'd lost. Whether you're holding on to memories, mending relationships, or simply trying to make sense of the world today, this story offers hope. You still matter. Your presence, your kindness, your story, they carry weight, because sometimes the most powerful things we do aren't loud or planned. They're simple and human, and they last